absolutism is a type of national monarchy in which the monarch has great power and tends to be looked up upon with awe and reverence.
Despite its name, the power of the monarch is limited by the need of some measure of support from the landed aristocracy.
In today's episode, we will discuss the developments of absolutism in France, Russia, and England through the rules of Louis XIV, Peter the Great, and Charles I.
Louis XIV demonstrated his power by standardizing the French language, increasing tariffs, becoming a huge patron of the arts, having over 300 portraits of himself. The effects of this, having a huge gap between the rich and the poor, and having all the power move to the next monarch. Versailles, one of the biggest palaces in the world. The extravagant Louis XIV built this palace so it can be something the world cannot unsee. In a time of great debt, France built the building of Versailles under the leadership of Louis XIV. Louis demonstrated his power by building one of the largest houses in the world. The building of Versailles took a large toll on France, creating even more debt and a large gap between the rich and the poor. Versailles was huge, spanning the length of 9 football fields, plus a garden and many excessive rooms. It would take more than 3 days just to see every room in the palace. One of the most interesting rooms in Versailles was the Hall of Mirrors. It consisted of windows on one side and mirrors on the other, so when you looked at the king, the light would be blinding due to the amount of mirrors reflecting the sunlight. This was, once again, a demonstration of the power of Louis. The Edict of Nantes was an edict passed by Henry IV that gave Calvinist Protestants, aka the Huguenots, substantial rights in a predominantly Catholic nation. The revocation of the Edict of Nantes caused the Huguenots to leave, along with business owners and artisans.
Peter the Great is one of Russia's most famous czars. Known as the Tsar Reformer, Peter was all about westernization and modernization, and even took a trip to Europe just to perfect it. Peter really wanted to increase trade between Russia and other nations. In order to do that, Russia needed access to a warm water port. Peter set his eyes on the Black Sea, but he had to fight the Ottomans for it, which resulted in Russia losing badly. Peter's greatest impact on Europe may be St. Petersburg. After defeating Sweden for access to the Baltic Sea in 1703, Peter began construction for a royal town. He named it St. Petersburg. His palace, Peterhof. Peter forced nobles to move into St. Petersburg, just like Louis XIV forced nobles to move into Versailles. Versailles to Louis XIV is St. Petersburg to Peter the Great. Peter the Great's trip to Western Europe is known as the Grand Embassy. The purpose of the diplomatic mission was to strengthen ties with European nations, learn as much about Western Europe as possible, and bring it back to Russia. He traveled to Germany, the Netherlands, and England, disguised as a sailor in order to fit in. He and his men learned anatomy, papermaking, wielding, and how to build boats. Everything they did was hands-on. When Peter returned from his trip, the people of Russia were ready to revolt, after basically having no leader for such a long time. So for Peter, it was time to crack the whip and regain control over his country. Peter eliminated the boyars just like the elimination of the Huguenots in France. He standardized legal codes, educated aristocrats, increased metal production, changed his military by forcing serfs to be soldiers. He also issued a beard tax, which forced many men to shave their beards instead of paying to keep them. Peter continued to reform Russia, even towards the end of his life. In 1721, Peter became the Emperor of Russia, an upgrade from being the Tsar, just 4 years before his death.
In England, Charles I inherited a monarchy that was in deep debt and found himself in war with various European nations. Charles I continued to request money from Parliament, and Parliament continued to deny him that money. In 1629, he approached Parliament for more money, and Parliament said they would give him more money if he signed the Petition of Right. This stated that the monarchy could not imprison subjects without due cause, levy taxes without the consent of Parliament, house soldiers in private homes, and impose martial law during peacetime. Charles I signed this document and in time ignored it. Parliament refused to give him more money after this, so he dissolved Parliament in 1629. Even though it was dissolved, Parliament still controlled the money of England. So, Charles I increased fees and fines on English people to raise money. He also increased taxes without the consent of Parliament. He was forced to reconvene Parliament in 1640 when England was under attack by Scotland. Parliament agreed to give Charles money, but they also tried to limit the power of the monarchy. In 1642, Charles tried to arrest 5 members of Parliament. This caused a mob outside the Palace of London. In reaction to this, Charles fled to northern England where he still had supporters. This was the beginning of the English Civil War. The English Civil War lasted from 1642 to 1649. It consisted of 2 sides, the Royalists or the Cavaliers, and the Parliamentarians or the Roundheads. The Royalists were those who supported the monarchy, and they were led by Charles I. They relied on contributions for money. The Parliamentarians were those who supported Parliament and were primarily made up of Puritans. They were led by Oliver Cromwell. They won because Parliament still controlled most of the money. After the English Civil War, Charles I was tried for treason and was beheaded.
The use of absolutism varied greatly between France, Russia, and England. In France and Russia, absolutism was more successful because they attempted to give to the country through things such as Versailles in France and the Grand Embassy in Russia. Absolutism in England was not nearly as successful because he took political power away from the people by dissolving Parliament.
You freak!